Hello everybody, so it's the first like proper kind of sunny, springy day today, which means it's the official beginning of when making these videos will feel like a little bit more of a chore because I have to like close my windows so I don't get any outside sound, and of course have to stay inside rather than going outside and experiencing all the joys of the forthcoming summer. But the fact of the matter is I can't complain because there's a job that needs to be done, and that's responding to people on YouTube who make videos about gender identity. And we're going to be responding to this video by, I can't remember the name, something about Dan. The name is Duncan, no, not Dan then, DuncanCantDie. And the video is called Debunking Every Transphobic Argument Any Percent Speedrun. By the way, this video was requested by quite a few people, and you have managed to motivate me to actually upload my response to this video sooner because you were requesting it, but it does mean that I'm now delaying the release of my response to ContraPoints on pronouns, because I was going to upload the ContraPoints pronoun video today, part 3, but instead I'm uploading this video because it's a more recent video and a video that loads of people were requesting. So if you're annoyed that we're not getting the ContraPoints part 3 video until next week, blame all the people who were asking me to review this video. Now, I was considering, in the spirit of this being nominally a speedrun, trying to do a speedrun myself and going through this video as fast as I can, but I'm not going to do that. That's the last thing I would ever do on this channel. We're still going to amble around all over the place and have all sorts of asides and things like that. But you know what? At the end of the day, we're still going to be right. And that's kind of the important thing. So yeah, let's just jump into the video and see what great debunkings are coming from Duncan.
We've been seeing a lot of transphobia recently. There's been a huge resurgence in the transphobic narrative on Fox News and in right-wing media in general. And there are lots of reasons for this. But
well, there are lots of reasons why people are becoming more critical of gender identity. I actually didn't pause for that. I just paused to say, what is this guy's accent? I really can't place it at all. But I'm interested to see what reasons are given for why transphobia has resurged.
What I want to address is all the dumb transphobic arguments that I see all the time in my comment section.
Okay, so just for the record, there wasn't any attempt, not that there needed to be, but I just want to let you guys know that there wasn't an attempt to explain why it is that, you know, gender critical ideas, which is what I assume is being meant by transphobic, why those ideas have emerged and become more popular. So we're just getting straight into the arguments, which is fine.
Look, if you're a transphobe or you're anti-trans, just say it with your chest, right? We get it. You're scared of different. You don't like things that are different. You're very against them because...
Well, no. That's an absurd thing to say because it's like, I mean, it's pretty obvious because just if you're using the word difference, that's going to obviously be quite a reductionist way of understanding these things. I'm scared of difference, guys, but I'm not scared of different sexualities, different sexes, different races, different religions, different political ideas. I mean, there certainly are political ideas and religions for that matter, which I think have some, you know, bad ideas, which do scare me. But the point is, it's not that I'm just reflexively scared of difference. Now, of course, you have the second issue here, which is that I'm also not scared of gender identity or trans identity. And indeed, most gender critical people aren't. Do you get the impression that J.K. Rowling is scared of transgender identity? Because no, the reality is we don't agree with it. I don't agree with transgender identity because I haven't seen any good arguments for transgender identity.
Because they terrify you and you want to lash out and try and blame trans people for the fact that you are a sad, pathetic loser. Because hate...
Epic. I mean, I don't, you know, it's just such a ridiculous claim to even have to respond to. Like, I hate trans people because I'm upset that I'm a pathetic loser. I don't know. I mean, it's a very, very weird argument to be making. And yeah, I don't think, to be honest, if anything, it sounds like this person is lashing out. Like, if I were to actually turn this around, I could say that I suspect this person doesn't actually have good arguments for the claim that transgender identities are valid and is lashing out with insults like this because he can't actually evidence the claim that a biological male can be a woman. That, I think, makes far more sense. And to be honest, yes, I see lots of trans-identified people and their kind of advocates on Twitter or on YouTube seeming to be incredibly angry when all I'm doing is arguing. All I'm doing is saying, well, let's try and tease out whether or not what you're saying here makes sense. And all they can do in response is get angry, start moralizing the issue when it's not appropriate, and of course start insulting me personally. So it seems like they're the ones lashing out, and it's because of insecurity, not just this like nonsense, oh, it's because they're a loser. No, it's because they don't have arguments on their side. And that seems to be the issue.
Hateful people, you never end up being happy, fulfilled people, right? I've never met a bigot who ends up actually turning out to be a happy, fulfilled person.
Again, this is also ridiculous because this is actually something I've said a lot about trans-identified people. I've never met a trans-identified person who seems content. This myth, we're told, is that as soon as you accept somebody's trans identity as valid, they'll be happy, really fulfilled people. And then you look at actual reality and they're deeply miserable people who are angry all the time, who are terminally online. A lot of them have seemingly substance abuse issues. A lot of them still have really serious mental issues. And yeah, the reality is you compare that to somebody like me. Look, people think that I'm just obsessed over this topic because that's what my channel's about, because, you know, my channel has a consistent thing that I talk about. But the reality is that I'm actually very happy, very content with my life. And to the extent I'm not content with my life, it's nothing to do with like this furious anger I have about trans-identified people. All of this is just completely inaccurate, and not only inaccurate, but yeah, like I say, applies more accurately to the other side. That it's trans-identified people who do not seem to be content. It's trans-identified people who seem to be angry. It's trans-identified people who seem to be obsessed. And I've never once like found myself interacting with a trans-identified person thinking, oh golly, I wish I were them, because doesn't their life just seem so happy? And the thing is, it's not that I don't want to be them because of all the discrimination trans-identified people face. No, it's because trans-identified people in themselves seem to be deeply miserable, unhappy people. And yeah, I've never thought to myself, oh, I wish I were them. The reality is that, by contrast, you know, guess what? If you were me, it wouldn't be the best thing ever, but at least you wouldn't just be deeply miserable and angry and, you know, arguing with people all the time online and insulting people and lashing out at people. Yeah, I think that this is an absolutely ridiculous characterization from Duncan here.
It's always to mask some kind of unhappiness in your life. So just own it. Just be like, I'm an unhappy, hateful person, and therefore I'm transphobic. Like J.K. Rowling, she owns it, right?
What? That's okay. This is absurd for two reasons, two really obvious reasons. One, J.K. Rowling does not give the impression of being unhappy and hateful. And this just shows that you're like really ignorant about this, because, for example, one of the big things J.K. Rowling does on Twitter, apart from, you know, talking about gender identity, is also interacting with her young children fans. And she obviously had that thing for World Book Day where she was retweeting all of these cute pictures of little kids. And there was like this baby in dressed up as Harry Potter. And it was adorable and everyone found it really, really cute. And that's the thing, like, yeah, J.K. Rowling gives the impression of being incredibly happy. And also you could point out the obvious, which is that even notwithstanding the fact that I think just kind of mentally she seems all right in herself. Again, I can't say certainly, but she seems to be happy. She seems to have very positive interactions with people, as long as those people aren't being actively hateful and misogynistic towards her. But also you would kind of expect her to at least be reasonably content because she is super mega rich. So yeah, I've never looked at J.K. Rowling and thought to myself, oh, she must be a deeply unhappy person who's incredibly miserable with her life. I have many times thought, oh boy, you know, I wouldn't mind living a life that at least got close to approximating J.K. Rowling's life, because it seems like a not, you know, obviously I'm not trying here to deny that J.K. Rowling has, of course, had issues and stuff that, you know, obviously people wouldn't want to experience happen in her life, but she's also clearly now seems to be in a very happy and positive place. So that's point one. By saying J.K. Rowling's like owning the fact she's miserable and hateful, no, she's not. But second of all, you seem to be arguing here that J.K. Rowling is very explicit in her kind of anti-trans stance. And the thing is, she isn't. J.K. Rowling is what I would call gender critical light. Like, for example, I am somebody who is very explicit in these things. There are other people like, for example, Sonia Long, and, you know, other kind of gender critical creators and people who talk about this, who basically do come out and just say, yes, a biological male can never be a woman. trans identities are not valid, all that kind of stuff. J.K. Rowling is gender critical light in that she still mostly focuses on questions like, well, trans identity is, well, I don't think she says trans identity is valid, but she's not focused on the issue of are trans identities valid. She's more focused on like defending women's rights and all that kind of stuff. Now, my stance, of course, is I think defending women's rights matter, but I think we need to also focus on the central issue, which is are trans identities valid, and indeed argue that they are not. So yeah, J.K. Rowling is just a bit of a weird example to point to here of apparently somebody who is just brazenly transphobic because they're so obviously unhappy and miserable about their life, because J.K. Rowling doesn't seem to be obviously unhappy and miserable about her life. And second of all, I really wouldn't say she is brazen and that, I guess, forthright in her rejection of the validity of transgender identity. She mostly kind of, talks about it in a slightly less direct sense, which of course she can do, but I personally fall into the category of somebody who's like, yeah, come on, JK, just come out and say explicitly that transgender identities aren't valid. But yeah, it's a bit weird, because I can understand somebody criticizing J.K. Rowling for not being explicit in coming out and saying transgender identities aren't valid. It's a bit wild to hear somebody give J.K. Rowling as an example of somebody who is coming out and being explicit about it, and again, communicates that this person has no idea about the actual discourse going on. That apparently J.K. Rowling is an example of somebody who's just super explicit about it. Even other trans-identified channels have argued that J.K. Rowling isn't super explicit about it. This is the only person I've ever seen come out and argue J.K. Rowling is an example of somebody who is explicit about this stuff.
So let's talk about this. The first and easiest to crush one is the people who go, what is Wifman?
I mean, first of all, it doesn't set up like a good feeling as to it being like easy to debunk. Like you're saying it's easy to debunk, and then you immediately represent it as like with this kind of like meme language. And it's like, look, if it's so easy to debunk, why can't you talk about it just honestly? Why can't you just say the first and easiest question to debunk is people who ask us to give a coherent definition of woman? That would be a very easy thing to do. But instead, to show how definitely not insecure you are, you're choosing to present it in that way. But apparently, yes, the question of what is a woman, aka, how do you define woman in a way that is coherent and makes sense? Apparently, that is the easiest question or easiest objection to debunk. Which, that's interesting because I've made entire videos responding to people who have just been addressing that question. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what's said here.
Here's the thing. These people seem to fail to understand a few things about language. One, words have multiple definitions.
Okay, words have multiple definitions. That's fine. I don't think anybody's failing to understand that. Are you arguing that gender-critical people aren't aware of words having multiple definitions? No, but the point is, any definition you're giving, it needs to make sense. You need to argue why it's appropriate to have multiple definitions for a word. And to be honest, I'm really not sure about that claim that like words have multiple definitions. You can have different ways of expressing something, but really for most, I could almost argue that a word is, and I'm not going to make things harder for myself than I need to be. So take this as sort of more speculative, or kind of like, I'm saying this a bit cautiously, I'm not totally sure about this, but I feel like you could make a legitimate case that for something to be a word, it needs to have one singular definition. Again, I'm not totally sure about that, so I'm mostly just going to focus on the point that, okay, even if words can have multiple definitions, those definitions still have to be good and make sense. So let's see whether or not, this is actually going to amount to anything as an objection.
I'm not going to argue that one of the definitions of woman is not an adult female human being. That is absolutely one of the definitions of woman.
Okay, so there we go. There's the concession. Well, one way you can understand a woman is a biological female, an adult biological female. Great. Okay. So no objection to that so far. Now, all that needs to happen is there needs to be a good argument for why it makes sense to say that a biological male can also be defined as a woman. So yeah, let's see if that's the case. Because of course, yeah, the argument from gender critical people is not give us a definition for woman that also shows why the biological definition is wrong. You can argue if you like, well, both a biological definition and another definition are both correct. That wouldn't respond to the gender critical position, because the gender critical question is, well, what is your other definition and why does it make sense and how does it work?
Another definition of woman, because it's from the word Wifman, is a married female. You have to be married to be a woman.
That's the genetic fallacy. So the genetic fallacy is when you assume that the origins of something have some kind of essential hold over how that word should be understood in the present day, or how that concept should be understood in the present day. There are many examples of this. A really obvious example is that abortion was first advocated for by eugenicists. That doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that you can now not detach abortion from eugenics. Of course you can. And there are other examples where it doesn't make sense to say that just because the origins of a particular thing, whatever it is, whether it's a word, whether it's a concept, whatever else, exists in this kind of awkward situation, to then say, well, that's what the word means now, or that's what the concept means now, and that's what the concept should be understood with reference to. That's simply not accurate. And indeed, of course, definitions change. Definitions do change. It's kind of hilarious that I'm the one making this point. Usually I'm the one having to point out that yes, of course definitions do change when a trans-identified person uses the whole definitions change thing. Here, apparently I'm the one who has to point out definitions change in the first place. Definitions change and definitions can fall out of favor. It's entirely possible that there might have been a way that a word was understood in the past and it literally ceases to be properly defined by that word in the future. It's hard right now to think of an example. I do have the word gay in my head as obviously something which used to mean predominantly happy, but admittedly, it still does mean happy now. But I'm pretty sure there are actually words, I'm going to have to think about it for a second. Words that have totally changed meaning. 10 English words that have completely changed meaning. You ready for this? Awful. Okay, yeah, this makes sense. In fact, actually, that's a good example. Terrible used to not actually mean awful. Or it used to not mean, I'm using the word awful. Terrible used to not be a bad thing. People talk about Ivan the Terrible. Terrible kind of just meant it derives from the same word as terrific. It just meant kind of incredibly powerful. And therefore, when you hear obviously Ivan the Terrible, people hear that and they go, oh no, he even back in the day, they knew he was terrible, but it just means he, was enormously powerful. So awful used to mean it was a solemn or reverential wonder. So, and indeed, awful and awesome were synonymous as being awe-inspiring. I often say that one way you can prove you can have too much of a good thing is awesome is good, or full is bad. But basically, awful and awesome used to mean the same thing. But based on this guy's logic, you would therefore say, well, because in the past, awful meant the same thing as awesome, now today, that is a legitimate definition of awful. But that's not true. If I said that something was awful and I meant it was good, it was awe-inspiring, that would not be a legitimate definition because the definition of the word has changed. Cute originally meant sharp or quick-witted, so very intelligent, and it comes from acute, meaning obviously an acute, because you call people obtuse when you want to, for example, I would say that Duncan, and this argument in particular is very obtuse, and it used to be that of course acute meant the opposite to obtuse. It meant very smart and on point. Literally it is a point, an acute angle, and then that just got abbreviated to cute. But in the 1830s in America, it started to mean attractive. And now when you say cute, you aren't calling somebody smart. So again, smart is not a definition of cute. And I could go through the rest of these. There's fantastic, flirt, literally, which to be honest, literally, I think that's kind of silly. I don't think, people say that literally now means figuratively. But I don't know. I would say it's just it's more used now to exaggerate. So you say, I literally froze to death. And you don't mean I figuratively froze to death. You mean I literally froze to death, but you are meaning that in a exaggerated sense. So to me, the people who say literally has changed meaning, I don't agree with that. But obviously these other ones, certainly nobody uses awful, people still use literally to mean literally. But cute, nobody uses cute to mean smart. awful, nobody uses awful to mean awesome. And, you know, these other ones, you know, I can't bother to go through them, but yeah, fantastic, flirt, meet, myriad, nervous, nice, derived from the Latin meaning ignorant. It began as a negative term for a stupid, ignorant, or foolish person. And, you know, maybe it makes sense to imagine how if somebody was kind of, you know, stupid or foolish, maybe they would be really, really kind of accommodating or something like that. And that might have morphed into, you know, I'm just kind of speculating. I can't be bothered to read the whole paragraph, but then that would morph into nice. You can imagine that. But again, it's not nowadays in 21st century English valid to say that nice can be defined as stupid. That's not a valid thing to say. So what Duncan's saying here is wrong. Duncan is saying that woman means wife because hundreds of years ago, woman, what was it? It meant Wifman, which is like, you know, you're the wife of a man or whatever. Yeah, that's not a definition now, though. Languages change, definitions change, and certain definitions fall completely out of use. And of course, what makes something a definition? Whether or not it's used that way. When people stop using a word to mean a particular thing entirely. And, you know, I think eventually we might get to a point, for example, I mean, I still like to sort of kind of tongue-in-cheekly be like, I'm going to have a gay old day today. But there'll probably quite likely be a point where people stop using the word gay to mean happy at all. And at that point, it would not be accurate to put happy as a definition of gay in the dictionary. And yeah, of course, it's not accurate to put wife or whatever it was as a definition of woman in the dictionary.
By the oldest possible definition of woman. So you saying if you're unmarried, you're not a woman now? Is that your argument? Because we're going back to the oldest, least evolved definition?
Nobody has been... Again, so this is a straw man, obviously. Nobody's saying that the correct definition is the oldest definition. People are saying the correct definition is the definition which makes sense. And of course, age and providence is one thing that will affect how we adjust. The thing is, definitions are an art, not a science, right? Like, I think that's a fair thing to say. But you consider things like, you know, how concise is a definition? You know, I was kind of thinking recently, actually, about a word that we should have, which we don't have, which is a word to refer to people who are attracted to men, and a word to refer to people who are attracted to women. And I don't know why I was kind of thinking about, like, it doesn't matter what I was thinking about, but basically I kind of realized that actually if you wanted to refer to people who are attracted to men, you would have to say bisexual or straight women, or bisexual or gay men. That's, like, as far as I can tell, the quickest way to refer to all the people who are attracted to men. And what you'll notice is that's not very concise, and therefore, for example, one of the things that you consider in a definition is, does it help to make things more concise? Does it help to make things kind of shorter and easier to communicate? That's just an example, but the point is that's something that you might consider when it comes to, you know, definitions and, like, giving words definitions and working out what definition for a word is correct. If anybody is saying, like, yeah, if you can find somebody who's literally saying that the kind of biological definition for somebody being a woman is the correct definition because it's the oldest definition, then, you know what? Yeah, sure, this is a good response to them, but I think that's a pretty self-evidently ridiculous definition in the first place. I can't help but look at the chat. It says, trans people are hotter than transphobes, and they are scared of it. I don't know. I mean, I would say it's not, yeah, it's more about just, do their arguments make sense?
Because current definitions are things like a person's wife, girlfriend, or female lover. He wondered whether Billy had his woman with him. You've heard this before, okay? You've heard it before. Someone talking about someone's woman. Oh, that's his woman.
Yeah, because... yeah, because they're women. That doesn't... But that's a legitimate... In terms of the use of the word woman there, it's a legitimate use of the word woman. Now, obviously, morally, the kind of referring to somebody as somebody else's woman, you could object to that. Although, of course, it should be pointed out that if you kind of swapped it around, I think most people would be all right with saying, oh, it's her man. Like if you said, oh, it's her man, you wouldn't have an issue with that. here's the issue. According to, yeah, what Duncan's implying here, that we say his woman extends not from the fact that it is, or she is his woman, that she is, a woman who, through, a particular conception of relationships, belongs to this man, but rather because of the ancient historical use of the word Wifman as the etymological derivation of woman, which means that it's with a man or whatever. Yeah, that's not why. And of course, the reason why is because if you reverse it, it's equally valid to say her man. Why? Because if you have, if you would say that it's accurate to understand relationships as meaning you belong to the other person. And of course, some people might find that objectionable. Some people might find it kind of beautiful to say, you belong, I belong to my fiance and she belongs to me. Some people would say that's a nice way of looking at things. Some people would say, that's not necessarily a nice way of looking at things. Whatever. The point is that if you understand it as, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you belong to that person, and also you are a man, then yes, I am her man. She is my woman. The idea that this derives from, this ancient idea of like with man, meaning like wife or whatever, is not evidenced by the simple reality of how these words are used currently. And of course, the term man, if I can be described as a woman's man, and indeed I can be described as a woman's man, wouldn't that imply that man also must have historically meant with woman? But that's not true, is it?
Yeah, that's another meaning of the word woman, and a really interesting one.
This is really dumb. So yeah, the logic there is if you describe any noun with a possessive, is that a word? A possessive pronoun before it, then that's another definition. That would be like saying, well, you have an orange, which is like an orange citrus fruit or whatever. But also you have another definition, which is a person's orange citrus fruit. No, that's not how it works. It's not like that my orange is a fundamentally different thing from orange itself. Or that my house is a fundamentally different thing from houses as a just abstract concept. And likewise, my woman is not a fundamentally different thing or a fundamentally different way of understanding the word woman from woman.
And a really interesting one is a person with the qualities traditionally associated with females. And specifically here, they're talking about social qualities. So if you're going to try and get me on a lexiconical argument, if you're going to try and get me on a...
Okay, so I just need to point out the obvious here, which is, okay, yeah, sure. That could be how you define woman, but should that be how you define woman? So first of all, people might object to that based on, there is another red kite outside my window, by the way. Big fans will know that I'm a fan of red kites. But yeah, people might say, well, is that really like a kind of logical or like intelligent way of understanding the word woman? That if I were to perform certain roles, I would suddenly become a woman? Does that make sense? And it's important to understand, by the way, that's how definitions work. Like, because people might say, like, if you're saying that the definition of a woman is somebody who fulfills the social role of a woman, you would not only be arguing that somebody can become a woman by fulfilling the social roles of a woman, you would be arguing that somebody who fulfills the social role of a woman must be a woman, because that's how definitions work. If I define, whatever, I don't know, a chair, let's say, okay, I'll say a chair. If I define a chair as a seat for one person, whatever else, I gave my definition of chair in a previous video. I'm not just saying that thing can be a chair. I'm saying if something meets that criteria, all of those criteria, it is a chair. That's how definitions work. If somebody meets all the criteria laid out in the definition, they have to be the thing that the definition is describing. So if the criteria laid out in your definition of woman is meeting the social role of woman, then it would have to be the case that any biological male or any person, but of course biological male is the most relevant thing here, who meets that criteria becomes a woman. So yeah, now you're in a situation where we're actually imposing the word woman on gender non-conforming biological males. And is that what you want to do? Because if that's the definition which you think is like a valid definition, then that's what you're doing. So that's issue number one. The second issue is, of course, how nebulous this is as a concept. You might be thinking, well, what is the social role of a woman? And yeah, that's a very legitimate question. This isn't like an easy, You would kind of, it's a messy definition. And again, like I say, definitions are an art more than a science, but it would be nice to tidy that definition up a little bit. Like, what exactly do you mean when you say the social role of a woman? There is a third issue, of course, which is, well, actually, according to transgender identity, you could argue that it's saying that even somebody who doesn't fulfill the social role of a woman is still is still a woman if they identify as such. So, for example, do I fulfill the social role of a woman? No, clearly I do not fulfill the social role of a woman. And yet, there is a pretty mainstream argument in transgender identity, or like with regards to gender identity being valid, which would say that if I simply identified as a woman, I would be a woman, even though I am in no sense fulfilling the social role of a woman. So, again, is Duncan here tacitly admitting that that particular way of understanding women, where it's just about identity, is wrong? And so there we go. All massive issues, huge issues, and yet we still got one other issue, which is the moral issue here. Does it make sense to say that we should define, like, even if this were a kind of legitimate definition in terms of its usage, is that a definition we should encourage? Because, of course, there have been definitions in the past which have been morally objectionable, and it has been legitimate to criticize those definitions on moral grounds. And I would argue a definition which says that you are a woman if you fulfill certain roles is so sexist, so obviously sexist, that it should be opposed on moral grounds. And if we had a definition concerning race that said you can be a black person if you stereotypically fulfill the role of a black person, that would be an object. Even if it was a popular definition, a widely used definition, it's a definition it would be very legitimate for us to object on moral grounds, or object to on moral grounds. The same way that person has been defined historically in ways which have excluded certain marginalized groups. And we object to those definitions on moral grounds, even if they function kind of, if you like, intellectually as definitions. So there's, four massive issues with that definition of somebody who fulfills the social role of a woman. First of all, it means that you're basically saying that biological males who are gender non-conforming could have that label of woman imposed upon them. Second of all, let's see if I can get this right. Second of all, it's quite nebulous as a definition. Third of all, it doesn't actually account for the full extent of transgender identities being valid, because transgender identities being valid would include also people who have transgender identities but don't fulfill the social role of the gender with which they identify. And fourthly, you can make a moral objection that this is a very sexist way of understanding what it means for somebody to be a woman, and to say a woman is definitionally somebody who performs this sexist stereotypical social role in society. That's an incredibly gross and horrible and misogynistic way of understanding being a woman. Bad definition.
Definition of words. Sorry, lexiconical is a word that you probably don't understand.
Good one. You're so smart. Ha 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 ha. You're so smart. You almost. Oh, sorry. Apparently, I'm not smart because I pressed play halfway through talking. You're so smart that you didn't even just drop a definition which has four obvious massive issues with it. Aren't you so smart? Oh boy, I wish that I understood the word lexiconical or whatever it is.
I'm sorry, but included in one of the definitions of the word woman is people who are not biologically female. Specifically.
Again, here's the issue. You seem to be like, so it's kind of embarrassing. You're so proud that you have a definition that that would allow for the idea that some transgender identities are valid. This is the issue, okay? Having a definition, this is what you don't seem to understand. Having a definition is not a good enough reason to start like getting all high and mighty as if you've like completely nailed this, as if you're like, I've got this, I've got a definition. No, seeing whether or not that definition works and stands up to scrutiny is the next challenge, right? Like, I'm not saying, what is your definition of woman? Because I'm suddenly going to be like shocked and taken aback and, I'd be like, wow, clearly you know what you're talking about if you provide a definition. I'm expecting you to be able to provide a definition. That's the least I'm expecting of you. The next question is, does that definition work? And in this case, I've got four massive issues with your definition. So it's not so impressive.
Included, by the way, as an official definition of the word woman. Language evolves. Get used to it.
Language evolves, get used to it, and then suddenly you're saying that, like, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, again, look, the reality is that official definitions can be objected to. Like, that's the thing. sometimes official definitions can be objected to for a variety of reasons. Nobody's saying that the official definition is always correct. This is a point I made on Twitter a while ago, that like there's this ridiculous idea that gender critical people automatically think the definition is the dictionary definition is correct because it's official. No, dictionary definitions can be wrong.
All right, get used to it. Things change. Transphobes in the dictionary now. That's you.
It says get used to it. Things change. Here's the thing. I'm fine with things changing. They just have to be changing correctly. Again, like if it's so obviously nonsense to defend like anything ever happening by being like, well, things change. Like, you know, I don't know if I don't know, some Ukrainians are complaining about the invasion and someone just goes, things change, get over it. Are you saying nothing should change? You know, like, I don't know, it just seems like it's not actually that great of a refutation.
All right, transphobes, that's the people watching this video ready to comment how I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm not.
I mean, okay. So I can't help but look at the chat a bit, but yeah, everyone's talking about Wifman. A lot of people are apparently very enthused by the idea of going back to Old English, whatever. Anyway, yeah, I mean, you think you're not wrong, but well, I don't know. I mean, look, people, the good thing is at this point, if somebody's watching this video, they've already seen my response to everything you've just said, and they can decide if they think you're wrong.
It's a definition of woman. That one's done. Okay.
It's a definition of woman. Yeah, I guess. You know what else is a definition of woman? A mechanical device which you put bread in and then you pop it down and then it comes out and the bread is now toast. That's a definition of woman. It's not a very good definition, is it? Yeah, like, again, having a definition is the bare minimum. It's not some massive thing to do a big, you know, don't start doing the victory trumpets or whatever because you have a definition. That was the bare minimum thing you could have done.
Okay, so please do not ever bring up that argument again. Now we're going to go with the people who love to argue.
I can understand why he's saying, please don't bring up that argument, because he wants you to believe that that argument is done with. He's like, it's done. Please don't bring it up again. Please don't question me on this issue, because I did such a good job refuting it, guys. I promise. I really did. Just don't bring it up to me again. Don't ever challenge anything I just said. Yeah, I'm sorry. I might have to bring it up again because you didn't do as good of a job as you think you did.
Argue biology. And I'm going to do a little bit of an appeal to authority here, logical fallacy and all that.
Okay, that would be shocking because you've only done 2 logical fallacies so far.
I'm a geneticist, okay? I understand the biology of sex a lot better than you do. I'm sorry, random person on the internet who dropped out of high school because you couldn't make it through high school level chemistry. I know more about biology and especially the biology of sex.
That's a very weird thing to say because, like, has the average person, like, who does this person think is watching this video right now? I would say that actually in the current society, I would imagine the average person watching a video like this has probably at least gone to university. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what kind of point that was supposed to be making. You know, it seems to me like it would have been more logical to have, like, I agree with the point that the average person is not a geneticist, but is the average person somebody who dropped out of high school? I would say high school dropouts are pretty rare, right? Certainly, yeah. I would assume right now the majority of people watching this are probably university educated, just because I imagine that, yeah, like that would make sense considering these videos that I do are kind of academic, whatever else. It's a bit of a weird thing to for this person to have said, but yeah, the claim is, well, he's a geneticist, and yeah, sure. I mean, you know, obviously he might well know more about genetics. I couldn't say one way or the other. What I can say is that, you know, in all academic fields there are disagreements. So of course, while you can obviously talk about somebody who knows a lot about a topic being an authority on that topic, you can't say that what that person's saying must automatically be correct, because of course there are going to be people in that same field with as much knowledge who do disagree. Do I have as much knowledge as this person? Probably not. I'm going to see if I can do as good of a job as I would like to refuting what's said. But of course, it's possible that I won't have, the knowledge to address the specific topics. For me, I'm more interested in why do definitions make sense, and I don't think you need to have specialist biological knowledge to understand that. But let's see.
I'm actually going to go through this very carefully, all right? Because there are a few potholes that you guys love to fall into. So the first, and
what I find weird is, like, I'm going to assume that, like, high school dropout thing, like, it would make sense if it was attacking, kind of like, let's say, your average Trump voter, like your kind of Midwestern working class white person, whatever else, who maybe, like, I don't know, works in a kind of working class trades job or something like that. But this just speaks to the fact that it's a bit weird to lump your entire opposition together under the label of transphobe, because it seems to be, because I can understand that in America, which I guess is where this person's from. Again, I will reiterate, I'm a bit confused about the accent here. But obviously Republicans are the people who are more against kind of gender identity in the United States. And yeah, I could maybe imagine that more of those people might be high school dropouts or whatever else. But then that is being conflated with, through the mention of J.K. Rowling, the kind of more intellectual gender critical movement in the UK. And it's like, there's not really an overlap between those two things, but whatever.
So they argue that when you're talking about someone's sex, sorry, I can't get my tablet to work, so I'm writing with my mouse. It's a little bit messy, but it's going to be fine. They argue that sex equals gametes. Big gamete equals female, small gamete equals male.
Okay, yeah. Just for the record, that's not the definition I hold to. And this is something, I need to talk about this. And this will possibly be the video uploaded. It's going to be a Tuesday video at some point, basically talking about an argument I had about this on Twitter. And therefore, I kind of don't want to talk about it in too much detail now. But I'm just going to say that I would say it's about what your body is actually kind of geared towards the production of. Because here's the thing. It's not really producing small or large gametes, because of course, if you're infertile, you won't produce any gametes. But rather, you've got to consider the fact that if my body is identical to the body of somebody who does produce small gametes, then I would say I'm biologically male. So it's pretty difficult to argue that it's the production of gametes itself that makes somebody a male or female, because that would seem to, I guess, mean that anybody who's infertile would fail to clear that bar of being a male or female. But obviously, in the same way you can still, and this is a classic example, you can still tell what a fridge is even when the fridge is unplugged, that kind of stuff. Like, most things you can recognize. And here's the thing, like, people will moralize about this. Like, I'm gonna have to kind of charge head into this. You can tell the difference between different appliances and different broken versions of those appliances. It's not difficult at all to tell the difference between an oven and a fridge, and a broken oven and a broken fridge. Now, I know people are going to say, what, so you're saying infertile people are broken? Well, no, not in a moralistic sense, but sure, there is something which, as human organisms, of course, organisms in general, do reproduce. That's one of the things organisms need to be able to do in order for organisms to continue to exist. So, like, the reality is that reproduction is a function of organisms. And with that said, in a totally non-moralistic sense, I'm not saying you're a worse person or something like that. That would be ridiculous. But yes, in some sense, you are failing to fulfill a function that you, in the strict, and again, not in a moral sense, just in like a biological sense, should be able to do if you can't reproduce. And with that said, if you're actually willing to recognize that I am not talking about this in moralistic terms, any attempt to moralize this and be like, oh, you're saying people are broken or whatever else, you can tell the difference between a male and a female, and you can also tell the difference between a infertile male and an infertile female, just like you can tell the difference between a fridge and an oven, and a broken fridge and a broken oven. because you can tell what a fridge, even when it's broken, is supposed to do. You can tell what an oven, even when it's broken, is supposed to do. In the exact same way, you can tell what an infertile male, even when he's infertile, is supposed to be able to do. You can recognize that there are things in that body that are geared towards doing something. There is no confusion that when you see an endotypic, is that the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a like anatomically stereotypical looking biological male, even if they're infertile, you can tell what the sum total of their testes and genitals and chromosomes is all supposed to be facilitating the production of small gametes, even when small gametes aren't being produced. So I just wanted to stress that distinction.
So on a species-wide level, we talk about dimorphic, but on an individual level, it's a lot more than dimorphic. It's a lot more complicated than just you're a boy or you're a girl.
Well, again, sure, there is all sorts of differences and variation, but that's kind of the point in having a definition of sex that can account for that variation. That's like the point. It's not, and of course, that's why we do have obviously this idea of kind of like I say the typical biological male construction of a human body and the typical biological female within different species. But also, of course, we do have differences of sexual development that will mean that certain individual organisms will to varying degrees differ from that typical form or typical phenotype of biological male or biological female. And what we're actually able to do pretty damn consistently and easily is recognize when we are dealing with a biological male who has a variation in their sexual development versus when we have a biological female who has a variation in their sexual development. And of course, most obviously that can be something as simple as being infertile. It's still very easy to recognize that an infertile male is not a biological female with a difference of sexual development. They are a biological male who, has had a slight thing go wrong in terms of their ability to fulfill a particular function within sexual reproduction.
The one you will have learned before you dropped out of high school is XX is girl or female and XY is male, okay? This is what we call karyotype. So XX is one karyotype because it's literally just the...
I do like how this is being explained like, again, there was like another drop of like, I'm explaining this to you because transphobes don't understand any of this or whatever. But like, this is all stuff which anybody who has really kind of delved into the nitty gritty of like the sex binary and stuff like that from the gender critical side, this is like basic stuff. And even like, I would assume for most of my audience, this idea of sex being defined with reference to different things like karyotypes, like genitals, like gonads, which I assume is what is going to be mentioned. Genitals and gonads. This stuff is not news to them. So, clearly, I'm not sure to whom you're trying to explain this, but certainly not to me.
You can have XX males and XY females. So you can have someone who is karyotypically female, XX, but phenotypically, so genotypically is the genes that are expressed. Phenotypically is what they look like when they're born. They look like a male, right? Genotypically and phenotypically male, XX, okay? Because there are lots of different levels. How does this work? Well,
again, see, what I'd be interested, now there's this recognition that it is a valid category to say somebody is phenotypically male or phenotypically female. So I'd be interested to see if phenotypes as a way of understanding whether somebody is male or female is going to be refuted. Because the mainstream gender critical understanding of whether somebody's a biological male or biological female is all about phenotypes. So I'll be interested to see if phenotypes end up getting discussed. I'm probably not going to comment too much on all of like the rest of this stuff because again, it's stuff which everybody knows.
So how do we get an XX person who is a boy? Well, what happens if your beta-catenin gene, the gene that produces this, is broken? Well, you can be XX, but because you never produce beta-catenin, SOX9 activates and you get an XX male.
See, this is always the issue with this. Like, there's an inherent contradiction at the center of this, which is that in order to talk about all the kind of like variation within specific categories and stuff like that, you need to have a pretty clear idea of what these specific categories are. And Duncan seems to have a clear idea of what these specific categories are. Duncan is able to say with a lot of confidence that you have a phenotypical male. Even allowing for all this variation, you still know whether somebody is a phenotypical male. So that seems like the obvious way of understanding whether somebody is biologically male. And of course, yeah, then you run into the issue that phenotypical males are currently trying to claim that they are women. And you have to ask, well, why should somebody believe that? Why should somebody accept that identity as valid?
Hormonal sex is another way we can look at sex. What hormones do you produce? What sex hormones does that individual have in their body? In what concentrations is a really good way to measure sex.
But hormones affect your phenotype. So again, it comes back down to phenotype, right? Like most of what makes somebody phenotypically male, especially, yeah, externally, secondary sexual characteristics, comes from high amounts of testosterone. And most of what makes somebody phenotypically female comes from high amounts of estrogen, right? So again, hormones seem to just come back to phenotypes.
And you can argue that hormonal treatment's bad, blah, 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 but you right-wingers love it because you all worship Joe Rogan. Guess who is taking testosterone?
Again, this kind of like conflation of right-wing, like meathead bros with like predominantly kind of, I guess, more like middle-aged English women. It's just a bit of a weird conflation. But yeah, I mean, so the point made there was, well, you can change your hormones. So doesn't that change your phenotype? But the reality is that your phenotype isn't just the external stuff, of course. And the internal stuff can't be changed. So that's why you don't look towards just one thing like hormones. You look towards phenotype more generally. And of course, the reality is that plenty of aspects of your phenotype you can't really change, like height and stuff like that. Or maybe you can, but like, I mean, like you're talking about stuff that goes right down to the skeletal structure of your body. So it's not so simple.
You only seem to have an issue with it when it's somebody that you don't understand or you don't like, who isn't on your side, who isn't echoing your bigotry.
Okay, so yeah, the claim there is like, oh, well, lots of biological males might take testosterone, so ain't like that. Well, here's the thing, okay? People shouldn't be taking testosterone unless there is a medical reason for them to be doing so. People shouldn't be taking, like, there needs to be argued that there is a medical reason for these things to happen. That's my stance on it. And there is no medical reason for a healthy biological female to be prescribed testosterone. And I don't think that the idea, you know, if somebody has this obsessive belief that they were supposed to be a man rather than a woman, that's a mental health issue. And I don't think you should solve mental health issues through like physical kind of therapy or you know, yeah, basically prescribing hormones. I don't think that's an appropriate response.
You argue sex equals gender, which it doesn't. Gender is a social construct. Sex is a biological fact. And sex...
Well, what do you mean? Look, sex equals gender. Again, like how is gender being defined here? That's just a meaningless thing to kind of say. Like for me, I would say sex equals, well, whether you're a man or woman is determined by your sex. That's my stance. And you could say it's a social construct if you liked being a man or woman. But then I would argue, well, sure, but that doesn't change the fact that we can define social constructs certain ways, and it matters how we do define social constructs. Race is a social construct, but that still doesn't mean it's a complete free-for-all where anybody can just identify as whatever race they like.
Isn't even binary on an individualistic level. You're incorrect. I'm sorry. It is a very complex system, and you don't understand it.
But why isn't it a binary? You seem to be, and look, okay, here's the thing. First of all, sex does not need to be a binary in order to say, like, even if it were true that there were all of these, like, different in-between stuff, that doesn't change the fact that a biological male is still a biological male. Like, even if there are other options apart from biological male and biological female, biological males are still biological males, biological females are still biological females. But then you have the fact that you didn't really do a very good job showing that sex is not a binary. I've seen other people do better jobs at it, and to be honest, it should have been easy to, like, make me not really have anything to say here because I don't really know much about like the whole biological science side of it. But it seems to me like you just keep referring back to phenotypes. So I'm like, okay, why don't we just refer to phenotypes then? Okay, so that's going to be the end of the video. We're going to have some more of it to respond to next time. We definitely wouldn't be able to cover the rest of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if the rest of it's just going to be about biology. It's possible that we won't for the second part. We won't have as much to say. I'm not sure. I can't really predict it very accurately. Certainly, like at the beginning, there was lots of stuff to say because that whole like thing of how it makes sense to define man or woman, that's something which I'm very interested in. So I kind of had a lot more to say about that. I'll be interested to see what's said going forward in the next part of the video. But overall, yeah, if you enjoyed this video, then please do like it. Please do comment below to let me know what you think. Please do share it with other people. Subscribe to see more. Get the bell on, all that kind of stuff. You can also give on Patreon if you want to kind of support what I'm doing financially and, you know, that kind of stuff. That's really appreciated. And yeah, I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. In addition to the names scrolling past on your screen right now, I would like to give a special thanks to last month's patrons, Charlotte, Sambuca, and Skeptical. You're all very appreciated.